Hi, this is Sherry from the blog OurLifeHomeschooling.com. I'm going to be sharing with you today some historically accurate children's books about the Thanksgiving story. So these are books that I use to teach my kids the original Thanksgiving story. In November, I like to take a little bit of time every day or every couple days just to read some of these stories to the kids so that it's something that they hear every year, something that's familiar to them. The stories of the Pilgrims that came over on the Mayflower and of their relationships with the Native Americans at that time, it's stories of great faith and courage. The Pilgrims were deeply rooted in Scripture and risked their lives for their religious freedom. And the Native Americans, on their part, helped the Pilgrims. So it's a story that I want my kids to be familiar with and that I want them to learn lessons about thankfulness, about fortitude, about sacrificing for freedom. If you're new to my blog, my name is Sherry. I am a former public school teacher who never thought I'd be a homeschool mom. I am married to my high school sweetheart, Nelson, for over 20 years. We have 9 kids and 1 more on the way. And I love encouraging other homeschool moms in whatever stage they are in with their kids. For more information and links to all the books that I'm going to be sharing in this video, I would encourage you to head over to the blog. I have descriptions of each of these books as well as links to where you can purchase them. One thing that I like to bring attention to with my kids is the importance of looking at original historical documents to kind of get a framework of the picture of the true story of what happened at certain time periods. So I would encourage you as well that you look at some of these original historical documents for yourself. Some of the historical documents that I have listed in the blog would be the Mayflower Compact, William Bradford's of Plymouth Plantation. You can look at the journals of the Pilgrims during this time. You can also look at some of just the artwork, like the samplers that some of the women did that kind of give you a little bit better picture. Later on in history, in the 1800s, Abraham Lincoln's proclamation making Thanksgiving an official holiday. These are all things that I like to refer to and to be familiar with myself to be able to sort fact from fiction. I'm going to go through these books in order of the easiest books to the more difficult books. So I'm going to start with just a beginning reader. The very first book is an early reader book for kids that are able to read on their own but maybe are not quite into chapter books yet. This is The First Thanksgiving. It was done by Linda Hayward. I read this to my kids, but as you can see, it's something that a beginning reader, someone who's just starting to read independently, would be able to read on their own. I like this book. I think it's very accurate to the original story. It has pictures of the Mayflower and talks about how there was the hold, the between decks, and then the upper deck where the sailors were. It talks about some of the hardships of the Pilgrims. And I like to read this book a couple times for my young ones to get familiar with it and also to hand it to them to read for themselves. The second book is a book that is a little bit more difficult, a little bit more challenging, maybe up one level from the last. This is The Thanksgiving Story by Alice Dalgleish. This is a 1955 Caldecott Award winner. So the illustrator, Helen Sewell, won an award for her illustrations in this book. This book tells the story more from the perspective of the Pilgrim children and talks about how things were on the ship, on the voyage over here on the Mayflower, and how it was when they landed, just setting up their colony. And then it talks a little bit about their relations with the Indians towards the end. At the very end, it talks about how Thanksgiving became a national holiday that we still celebrate. So this is another one that I will read to my kids, maybe once or twice. It's a picture book. You can get through it in one sitting if you want. I usually take 2 or 3 days and just read a little bit at a time. The third book is a book, The Landing of the Pilgrims by James Doherty. This is a book that in the past I have assigned it to my kids to read. It's just part of our Ambleside reading. It's one of the books that are listed there. But for the very first time this year, I have decided to read it aloud to the kids, and I'm really enjoying it. The author, James Doherty, he draws on the journals of the Pilgrims to be able to give us this account. This goes step by step. It starts when the Pilgrims, who were originally separatists during the time of King James, people were being thrown in prison. There was no free speech. The press was owned by the king, censored by the king. And there are some people that decided to stay in the church and try to reform it. Those were the Puritans. There were others who decided to leave. They were the separatists and try to get their own freedom to worship the Lord. So this starts in England with the separatists leaving the Church of England, then how they traveled to Holland. They were there for 12 years, and then how they left Holland for the New World. This book, especially because he draws on the journals of the Pilgrims at that time, I feel like it's very true to the story. It's easy to read, and it's what I'm really enjoying with my kids. The fourth book that I enjoy reading to the kids is an audiobook. It's one that I've had them listen to several times. This is The Legend of Squanto. It's done by Focus on the Family Radio Theater. And to switch things up a little bit, I am going to bring one of my kids on to talk about the legend of Squanto as told in this story. This is my son Ty. He is a senior this year. He has heard these stories over and over again, so it's very familiar to him. He's going to tell you the story of Squanto, whose original name was Tisquantum.
So the story of Squanto starts off with a young boy and the Patuxet tribe in eastern North America. Squantum was stolen by an English sea captain and taken over to England to be sold as a slave. When he was taken to the marketplace, he was purchased, or not really purchased, but he was taken by a priest who did not approve of the slave trade, and he was taught Christianity and English. After that, he went with another English sea captain back to America. In exchange for his freedom, he was going to be a translator for Indian and Englishmen to set up a trade. After he was done translating for the English sea captain, he joined another Indian tribe. They discovered a group of pilgrims that had recently landed near them from England, and they were not doing very well. They had barely made it through the winter, and they needed help. He went with another Indian named Samoset to help the pilgrims develop a farming system so that they could support themselves. There, Tisquantum's name was changed to Squanto, and he stayed with the pilgrims for a majority of the time and helped them build up their colony. Shortly after, the Englishmen and the pilgrims had a great harvest feast, which we now know as Thanksgiving. They also signed a peace treaty which would last up to 50 years, creating a bond between Englishmen and Indian.
The fifth book I'm going to share with you is Rush Revere and the Brave Pilgrims. This book is told from kind of a historical fiction perspective. This is about the fictitious character, even though I know Paul Revere was a real person. This is about the fictitious character, Paul Revere, and his horse named Liberty. And they time travel, they go back in time to the time of the Pilgrims, and they ask the Pilgrims certain questions. For example, why did you want to leave Europe? Who's your leader on the Mayflower? And so it uses these fictitious characters to talk about how life really happened. If you've ever heard Rush Limbaugh while he was still alive, every Thanksgiving he did a rendition of the Thanksgiving story, and it's excellent. I have linked it in the blog if you'd like to see it and listen to it with your kids. One thing I like about this book is that, again, it has some original historical documents that you can look at. He has the Mayflower Compact in here that you can read. He also has some great artwork that shows William Bradford. I have a couple others in here that I marked. And some of the artwork that's been done since then by other artists' renditions. This is an artist rendering of Edward Winslow. and Miles Standish. Here you have the signing of the Mayflower Compact, as well as the Mayflower Compact that you can read and look at the names of the people that signed it. This book is one that my kids, for the most part, have listened to as an audiobook, and they just really enjoy it. It is 200 pages in length, so it's one that it would take you a little bit of time to get through it. That's why we've done it in the past as an audiobook. I just want to pop on here real quick to mention that both the books, The Landing of the Pilgrims and Rush Revere and the Brave Pilgrims, include something that is missing in most modern history books, and that is the utter failure of the commune system that was imposed on the colonists by the companies supporting them financially in England. They go on to explain how the colonists shook off the chains of this failing collectivism system when Bradford organized a new plan. He assigned a plot of land to each family to work and manage however they pleased. Under the new motivation of free enterprise, the Pilgrim colony began to thrive. So this is something that's mentioned in both the books, Landing of the Pilgrims and Rush Revere and the Brave Pilgrims, and I think it's something very noteworthy and important to include in teaching the kids. The last and final book is a personal favorite of mine. This is done by Family Life Today. It's called A Family Life Book, Thanksgiving, A Time to Remember by Barbara Rainey. The thing I love about this book is that it also includes original historical documents. One thing that I love about this book, if you look closely, you can see that it has large and small print. You can go through this book and read just the large print, and you would be reading the story to younger kids. But then you can also, if you have older kids, you can read the smaller print, which is kind of weaved throughout the story. You can read the large and small print to older kids. So you kind of have the option of tailoring it to the younger ages or bringing it up and giving more details to the older kids. I really like that. That works great in our family because we have a wide range of ages. This book has just some little known stories of things that happened aboard the ship, things that happened in the colony that I was unfamiliar with, that are really just stories of God's provision and of the great faith of some of these men and women and the risk that they took for their freedom. So this is a personal favorite of mine. It's one that we read every year for several years in a row, and my kids have become so familiar with it, we've kind of moved on to some other ones. But this is by far my favorite Thanksgiving book. Again, I have links to all of these on the blog if you would like to read further and find some good books to share the Thanksgiving story with your kids. In the next week, I'm going to be sharing some of our favorite Thanksgiving picture books that I read to my kids. So these are not just the Thanksgiving story. These are just great picture books that kind of give the culture and talk about some of the foods we eat at Thanksgiving, just books that we all enjoy reading together. If you like the content that you see on my channel, would you please like and subscribe? When you like a video, YouTube shows the video to more viewers. So it helps me in that way. If you'd like to follow along with Our Life Homeschooling, you can find me on Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, and Instagram. Thank you for listening in. I hope that you have found some great resources to use with your kids. Have a great week.